Dave.
Make that a little bit lower. Okay, I want to tell my story about my great-great-great-great-grandfather, Reverend John Corbley. He was a guy I heard about my whole life because my parents were always threatening to take us kids to the annual Corbley reunion in Girard's Fort, Pennsylvania, which was running for 80 years, literally 80 years, on the last Sunday of June. So it was my entire childhood, and it's still going now. So they were always threatening to take us. They took us once, and it was pretty uneventful. I don't really remember too much about it. But I didn't take it too seriously. I heard stories from my grandmother about this ancestor of ours, very interesting stories, but I didn't really understand why it mattered. I should have, because my brother's name is George Corbley Paffenbarger, my father's name is George Corbley Paffenbarger, my grandfather's name is George Corbley Paffenbarger, and my great-grandmother's name is Hannah Corbley, so I should have known. Sure enough, I grow up, I find out I care about this. All of a sudden, I want to take my own 3 kids and myself to the Corbley reunion. So I do. I take my kids. We're all ancestors of this guy. And we get there, and it's really very interesting. It's only about 45 people, but I know from reading that there are thousands of descendants of this gentleman because he was born in 1733, lived until 1803, and at that time, you know, he got married. He had 4 kids. His wife died in childbirth with the 4th. So he married someone else. They had 5 kids. She died on the frontier. So he married someone else, and they had 8 kids. And so all said and done, this guy had 3 wives and 16 children. So there are plenty of people, thousands of people who are descendants of the Reverend John Corbley. So we go to this thing. It's fascinating because they've got storytelling about this fellow. They've got books for sale, The Life and Times of John Corbley, Frontier Preacher. They've got little tours where you could sit by the side of the road and people who know will point to the house that's falling down and tell a little bit about what was going on there once. And there's Girard's Fort, the remnants of Girard's Fort. This is in Girard's Fort, Pennsylvania, which is a little tiny town right next to West Virginia. It's a pretty depressed little area, but this tiny church continues to hold this annual reunion. There were 22 people in church that morning, and 4 of them were us. So it's fascinating to hear other people tell stories that I had heard as a child to a room full of descendants of the Reverend John Corbley. So I was thrilled to have my kids hear the story. And it goes like this. 1747, John Corbley's 14 years old, and he steps off of a ship that has come from Ireland and landed in the port of Philadelphia. And a farmer, a Quaker plantation owner from southern Chester County, the Nottingham area, goes to the port and pays the steerage for this young man and turns him into an indentured servant. So John Corbley, at the age of 14, is an indentured servant for 4 years at this plantation in southern Chester County. And he falls in love with Abigail, the plantation owner's daughter. They're Quaker, so she has to be excommunicated. She is shunned from her community when she marries John. John is an evangelist, a preacher, and he decides, or they feel they're persecuted for their religious beliefs, and they move to the far western frontier of America, western Pennsylvania. And they set up a home. They build a log cabin, and it's right outside of Girard's Fort, which is an outpost established by the U.S. government to help protect the residents of these settlements from wild Indian attacks, because there were many wild Indian attacks. And that's because this was in the day of the tomahawk claim, where you could claim land and then petition the government to own it. And so this is what he did. He made a tomahawk claim and he petitioned to own this property. He got it. But that's why there were wild Indian raids. This property actually belonged, the land actually belonged to the Native Americans there. So they build this cabin, and one Sunday morning, it was May 10th, 1782, John Corbley, and his wife, Elizabeth, she's the second wife, and their 5 children, head to church because he is going to minister in town, in the fort that Sunday morning. And en route, they're walking through the woods on a little footpath. En route, he realizes he's forgotten his Bible. And he says to Elizabeth, I'm going to go back to the cabin and get the Bible. You just go ahead with the children and I'll meet you in town. And so he does. He heads back to the cabin, and Elizabeth and the children head on. But as soon as John is out of earshot, they are ambushed, and Indians attack them. And Elizabeth, the wife, is tomahawked to death. And the baby, Nancy, who's just a tiny baby, is killed. And Isaiah, the 5-year-old, is tomahawked, as is Mary Catherine. But Delilah hides in a hollowed out log, and she watches what happens. She sees her sister Elizabeth get scalped. And she believes the coast is clear, and she steps out of steps out of her hiding place in this hollowed out log. But she's mistaken, and she is also attacked and scalped. So the two women survive, these two young girls survive, and John returns from getting his Bible, and he finds his family's been massacred and only his $2 remain. And Elizabeth actually goes on to be married and has a family. She wears a headscarf. Both girls wear headscarves for the rest of their lives. And Elizabeth actually dies at the age of 21 from complications due to her head wound. So I'm just telling you the story of this unusual world because nobody's getting scalped anymore. Thank you.